Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 7-game NBA slate for you and a 4-game college basketball slate for you. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? I'm going to do NBA first, and then I'll get to college basketball after this. Um, let's look at this slate here. So we do have an injury report today, though we have quite a few teams that don't have anybody on the injury report, which is nice. But let's go and get into that. So for the Spurs, Collins is questionable, Barlow is questionable, Wemby is out. Bassey is out, so that's going to leave a lot of openings for the Spurs with with Wemby out. They also have one of the highest total games on the slate. For the Hornets, Richard is questionable, Miller is questionable, and then Williams and Hayward are both out. Charlotte and San Antonio, both teams that are stackable today. Looking at the Philly-Orlando game, for the 76ers, Melton and Covington are out, and for the Magic, Franz Wagner and Harris are out. This is one of the lowest scoring games on the slate, and 76ers are favored to win. For Denver and Boston, there's no injuries to report at this point, and this game should be a pretty high total, but should be pretty tough to do fantasy-wise. Atlanta and Miami, this game does feature a pretty low total considering Atlanta's playing, and Trae Young is questionable, Hunter is out, and for the Heat, Love is questionable, but everybody else looks like they're back. Miami is favored to win the game as well. This is a game that I'm going to avoid for the most part on fantasy today. Looking at the Phoenix Suns and the Pelicans, Suns just have Bol out, but both teams look like they are full strength, and this total is pretty high. So this is a game that you could have some stackability, though it's going to have to be somewhat contrarian as both teams are priced up. Looking at Indiana and Portland, the Pacers are favored to win the game by 5 points, and Halliburton, Nesbitt, and Nimhard are all questionable. And for the Blazers, Sharp is out and Williams is out. I do expect Indiana to win this game, and I expect it to be a pretty high total. If the Blazers can keep up, then that would definitely help. But it looks like Siakam is going to play in this game likely. Looking at Brooklyn and the Lakers game, Lakers are favored by 7, though it does have a low total. The Nets have Simmons and Sharp out, and the Lakers have LeBron is questionable, and Reddish and Vincent are out. And I will talk about a couple Lakers when I go through my core plays. So looking at our core plays here, we have 3 and LaMelo Ball, Trey Jones, and D'Angelo Russell. Now I will say that D'Angelo Russell is he's very borderline there, so do keep that in mind. But LaMelo Ball is my favorite play on the slate. He's played very well since he's been back from his injuries. He's played 3 games so far, and he's been over 47 fantasy points in all 3. I expect him to have a bigger game here, as this game should stay close since both these teams are bad. They won't get blown out like they have the last 3 games, hopefully, but especially with Wemby out for the Spurs. So I expect him to have a huge game here, 50 plus fantasy points. He's underpriced, frankly, for the matchup. Looking at Trey Jones for the Spurs, now he's entered the starting lineup 7 games ago, and in 5 of the games he's been over 29 fantasy points. He's going to have a little bit of a higher usage as a result of Wemby being out too. And if you look at the last time Wemby was out against Chicago, he had 46 fantasy points. I expect him to have a lot of usage in this game, and so he's a viable option here. D'Angelo Russell does carry some risk here for the Lakers, but he has been inserted back into the starting lineup the last 4 games, and he has played very well in that stretch. He's also been over 30 minutes in 3 straight, which give him a lot of potential here. He is a very good player, though he tends to be scoring dependent sometimes, but I do like him today, and he's definitely a quality play. However, he does carry a little bit more risk than the other 2 core plays do. And so for some other options today, Sochan for the Spurs was very close to being a core play as well. Though he hasn't been quite as consistent as I'd like. His price is a little bit higher than I wanted it to be. But with Wemby out, he definitely has some upside. His floor is around 20 right now, so he's got a very safe floor. So he's definitely in play on the slate. Terry Rozier is in play today for Charlotte. Now, he obviously has to take a step back with LaMelo Ball being back. But in the last 3 games with Ball back, he still played plenty of minutes because the Hornets have a ton of injuries, and he's managed to be over 28 fantasy points in all 3. The price point here is a little bit higher than I'd like, but with his playing the last 2 games, I expect him to have some good opportunity here to have a big game. Looking at Bam Adebayo, he's one of my favorite options at center. He gets a favorable matchup here against Atlanta, who has not done well against centers this season. If we remove our last game where he only scored 30 fantasy points, he's been absolutely on a tear rebounding wise for a while, and I like his upside in this matchup, so he's definitely a viable option. He was kind of close to being a core play today as well. Anthony Davis is a guy that I don't like to use very much, but I can't ignore the fact that he's been playing fantastic in 4 of the past 5 games. His price is obviously pretty high, but if you can afford to put him in there as your like last forward spot or utility spot, then he's definitely somebody I would consider. Though he does carry some risk, as he is probable just about every game. Wendell Carter Jr. is a value play today, though he is a high risk value. He has played pretty well and throughout the season. However, he has been battling a lot of injuries, and that's limited his minutes. But the last game, he finally got a bit more minutes than he had been in a while. And while he's missed a lot of games with injuries, he has some potential today. He probably won't get back in the starting lineup yet, but he could get there pretty soon. And so if his minutes can keep moving up above 20, then he's definitely in play, especially at this price point. He's just dirt cheap right now. Looking at Joel Embiid, he's obviously in play every single game out. This is a tougher matchup, so it's not a must play, but he's definitely in play and has some potential here. And then Keldon Johnson, finally, he has some interesting upside when Wemby is out. As you can see, the last game against Chicago, he scored 41 fantasy points. The problem is he has not played well and not shot the ball well lately, which has been somewhat frustrating for fantasy, but that's also brought his price down. And with Wemby out today in a favorable matchup, he definitely has some potential. So he is high risk, high reward, but his price is cheap, and that gives him a lot of utility. So that's what I have for this NBA slate. I think it's a really good one. Honestly, there's a lot of decent value, and there should be some more potentially open up with the injury situation. Let's move over to college basketball. Now, this college basketball slate does feature 4 games, all within a tight window of totals. All these games are somewhere between 142 and 147 total points, and all 3 games are between a 7 point spread and a 12 point spread. So most of the games are very similar from that perspective. But I will break down each individual team here and kind of give you my thoughts. We do have some teams that are priced better than others as well. So first of all, we're going to look at the Georgetown Xavier game, and we're going to look at Georgetown first. Georgetown is the second worst offense on the slate. They're also the worst defense on the slate. Pricing is not good for this team either, and they are very avoidable. There's not much to like about them, and aside from Epps, who's their best player, he's also overpriced for this matchup. I think they're very avoidable. Looking at Xavier, they're the second best offense on the slate. They also have the highest total for any team on the slate. The risk here is that they blow out Georgetown, which is possible, but Claude should be a very solid play on this uh, as his floor is at around 3.5x, so that's pretty safe. Olivari is also a risky play, but he is in play if you want to stack him with Claude, but it's not horrible. His floor is too low to feel safe when it comes to this increased price, but Xavier is definitely a viable option, and like I said, Claude is probably my favorite play from this game, as he has a lot of upside, and he's one of the safest plays on the entire slate as well. So he's somebody that I definitely want to try to get in my lineup today. Looking at St. Louis and VCU. Now, this game does carry a similar total and spread as the first game at 8 points in VCU's favor. However, St. Louis has a lot of potential here, and St. Louis, they tend to be a little bit deeper with their bench, especially with them being at full strength, as they've had a lot of injuries this year, but everybody looks good to go right now. Their offense is good, though, and while VCU has a tough defense, I think they are priced well. The catch here is who's going to get all the minutes. But I do have a lot of guys that I do like here with Bradley Iziwiro, being one of my favorite plays from this team. He's priced pretty fairly here at $6,400. He does need 24 fantasy points to pay off, and he's had some foul trouble in a couple games. But even still, he's managed to be pretty good, and so he's a great play on the slate. Um, Looking at Jimerson here for them as well. He definitely carries some potential. He's been pretty good the last 4 games, and I do like his upside as a result. He has a pretty low floor at times, but in this situation, I think he's probably a pretty good option. Looking at Parker for them, now he's only played a handful of games so far this season, but he's back from injury the last 2 games, and he played 16 minutes the last one, and he almost paid off for the price that he is today anyway. In that game, this is a pretty solid opportunity. He has really high scoring ability early in the season before he got hurt, so I look for him to come here and probably play over 20 minutes finally and have a lot of potential to pay off very well here. I really like him a lot. Then we're going to look at Mike Meadows for them. He also carries some potential today, but he's been a little bit inconsistent lately. And part of the problem is he's had some injuries. I'm not sure if he's going to be a full complement of minutes today, but I think he'll likely be a viable, cheap option on the slate, but he does carry a lot of risk. Same goes for Larry Hughes, which is literally minimum priced. His minutes have been pretty inconsistent throughout the season, and with Parker back playing, I think that might hurt his upside here. But he's a Hail Mary play on the slate. I also like Cian Medley for St. Louis, as he's played inconsistent minutes throughout the year, but he definitely carries some potential on this one. So he's definitely in play here, but he has a lot of risk involved there as well. So then we're going to look at VCU. Now VCU is the best defense on the slate, and they have one of the most met offense, but they do have one of the most met offenses. Their studs are priced up, but there's a couple guys worth a look on the value side, and in general, stacking them could pay off. However, Joe Bamisil is the guy that I like the best here, and he has played 7 games so far this season, but his minutes have come down the last 2 games, so that is a little bit of a concern. But his price is nice and cheap, so I think he's probably worth a look here. Though he does carry the Hail Mary tag as a result of his price point and his minutes. But he's one of the guys that I do like from this team, and he has some potential on the slate. I'll get into who I think you can stack from this game later. Looking at Indiana and Wisconsin. Now, Indiana, let's see, uh, has had a very wonky season. This matchup is not great. They're on the lower end of the quality offenses of the slate, and they're also slightly overpriced. They are also projected as one of the lowest scoring teams on the slate, though there is a stackable unit here. They are pretty avoidable in an annoying matchup against Wisconsin. Big Ten basketball typically is not a great thing for college basketball for DFS, but sorry, for them. Their forward is actually playing pretty well, though he does have a very low floor. He is in play on the slate, so I did want to include him as a possible option. Looking at Wisconsin, they are the weakest of the favored teams offensively, and they have a good defense, but they also play slow. Big Ten basketball sucks for college basketball DFS, so they're pretty avoidable today, and I really didn't find much that I liked. There is a stack available with them, but I will talk about that here in a minute. Looking at UNLV, one of the worst offenses and slowest teams on the slate. They have one or two guys that have some potential due to reasonable price, and this game's total is not terrible either, as it's actually the second highest on the slate. And so for UNLV, Deedon Thomas, he is in play today, though he does carry some risk. He's had some really good ceiling games, and he has a higher potential than some of the other players. But Boone is also in play, though he definitely carries a little bit more risk. Looking at Colorado State, this is one of the better offenses on the slate, and they also have one of the better stackable opportunities as well. They have several players with upside, but they do tend to have lower floors than other teams. Their pace is also very slow, which is a issue, but they should play pretty well in this game and win, and that should give them some potential here. I have 3 players that I like quite a bit from this team, one of them being Stevens here for them. Now, he's played very well throughout the season, though he's a little bit pricey here. He's not a must play because of the price, but he's definitely a capable option, and his floor is a little bit lower than I'd like, but he's definitely a capable. Looking at Clifford for them, he's one of my favorite plays from this team. He has a lot of potential here. He's priced a little bit cheaper by almost $1,000 than Stevens, but he has just as much upside when it comes to his floor and ceiling. I should say his ceiling's a little bit lower, but he still has a high floor, and he's in a great spot here. And then Joel Scott, he's also in play for them, as he's been playing a good amount of minutes lately, and he has a lot of potential, though he has had some inconsistencies. He has a low floor, but his ceiling is high as anybody on the slate. So overall, I do like that team. So here's some potential stacks. I'm gonna stack. I have 6 stacks available, but I would say that I'm gonna stack them in order of the players here. So if you only like 2 players from VCU, then just use the first 2. So do keep that in mind. So looking at Xavier, I have 2 guys that are stackable, and that is Claude and then Oliviere. Those are my 2 favorite from the team. Looking at VCU. We'll look at Shugla first, Jackson second, and Bamisil third, down here at $3,600, and then we also have Barstow fourth, and Furman 5th. They all have some potential today, but they definitely carry some risk. Looking at Indiana, we do have a couple potential stack abilities here with Ware, Galloway, and then Baku, but that's definitely a high risk stack against Wisconsin. Wisconsin does have a stack as well with Crowell, Hepburn, and Klesmet, but that also carries some risk as that is a slowdown game. Looking at UNLV, Thomas and Boone is actually a pretty decent stack today with those two guys. I just would say to avoid most of the other options on the slate. Then we're going to look at Colorado State here with Stevens, Clifford, Scott, and Strong. So that is a stackable thing you could do with them as well. With that said, guys, these two slates are pretty wild, but I do think that they're going to be good. There's a lot of value in the college basketball side of things, which yesterday there was almost no value in college basketball, so it's definitely a flip on that front. And there's also not a bunch of super expensive guys on that slate for that matter. But at any rate, it should be a pretty interesting slate. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And have a nice day, guys.